Well, hey there, folks, and welcome to Redeemer Online. My name's Corey. I'm one of the new faces, a pastor on staff here, and it's our mission to help the physically scattered church to digitally gather and grow as disciples. And if that's something that interests you and you haven't done so yet, we really want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button down below, as well as that little joyful looking bell. And that will let you know when we put new videos out, and it'll let us know that you're here. And we are so glad that you're here. Now, on that note of growing disciples, we're going to talk more about that for just a few minutes after today's message. But for now, let's get into it. You know, I think that the fact that Christianity has survived as long as it has as a global religion is kind of fascinating. I mean, most sociologists by the early 2000s predicted that it would be not just on a steep decline, but that it would disappear altogether, that we just wouldn't have it anymore. And sometimes maybe that kind of feels like the case, especially in pockets here in North America where I'm at, maybe where you're living. But when I talk to people about Christianity, and they give me their thoughts on why it survived for as long as it has, I think they sort of fall into one of two camps. Believers will say that it survived because it's simply true, and that the beliefs are just accurate to reality and true, and the practices are beneficial. And some people might even say that Christianity makes your life better and may even make you better at life. Skeptics, on the other hand, they'll point to Christianity's historical link to power and privilege, whether it's the Catholic Church in the Roman Empire or the ruling classes in Europe, or the Christian ties to the colonizers, or even politics in the United States. They might say that the only reason Christianity has survived is because it's historically been a tool for gaining political power, even if that's not always the case today. Now, I think that there's a lot of validity in both of those perspectives. They have a lot of truth in them, but they don't fully explain why Christianity survived all the centuries. And I think they fail to explain why it survived the first couple of centuries. I mean, after Jesus' documented earthly ministry, followers of this new religious sect called the Way survived for 270 years. And in those years, their faith did not make their lives better. In fact, it made their lives more unstable. Jobs and careers were unstable. Many lost their social standing. They got booted out of their friendship circles. They got ostracized from their families and found themselves without the old rhythms of being a part of their community. It made life more challenging in many ways to be a Christian. And as far as being linked with political power, that actually didn't happen until 313 CE, when Constantine adopted Christianity as the new faith of the empire. For the 270 years or so between Christ and Constantine, Christians were persecuted heavily by both the religious structures of the day and the Roman Empire. I mean, emperors were famous for torturing Christians in those early years, which kind of makes it worthwhile for us to re-examine that question. When beliefs don't make life better and there's no connection to privilege or power, why did people stick with Christianity? Why did it survive all of these centuries, especially the first few? Now, I'm not going to pretend like I've got all the answers to all these questions, but in the next series of conversations that we're going to have together over the next couple of weeks, I want to invite you to just consider this idea, just consider it. When their beliefs didn't make life better and there was no connection to privilege or power, Christianity survived because of what its earliest disciples encountered. When their beliefs didn't make their life better and there was no connection to privilege or power, Christianity survived because of what its earliest disciples encountered. Now, every definition of the term encounter that I've ever seen has with it the word unexpected. Encounters are unexpected interactions that require some sort of individual or group to make a different decision, to go a different way, to choose a different route, to respond to new information. It's an interaction requiring a reaction. A couple of years ago, my wife and Alana and I, we were camping with my side of the family at Restoule Provincial Park, just a couple hours north of Barrie, Ontario. And on one particular night, it was our job to pack up all the garbage and the recycling and take it to the area of the park designated for disposal. They had these big flatbed trucks with cage walls and roof ceilings and gates that were supposed to be bear-proof. They could keep bears from getting into the dump trailers. They are not smell-proof, though, which means that there's nothing keeping curious bears from sniffing around. Now, I have never seen a bear anywhere near there in my entire life. So I wasn't expecting the sight that confronted us as we rounded the corner and the trailers came into view. I mean, a huge black bear was standing, blocking the first dump trailer gate. We encountered a bear, an unexpected interaction that required a reaction. Now, we had options. As you always do with any kind of encounter, we had options. We could have tried to make a bunch of noise, honk the horn, try to scare the bear away. We could slowly put the car in reverse and then maybe back out, try not to disturb the bear. Or we could get out and try to hand the trash bag to the bear and hope that the bear just simply says, thanks. We opted for the middle option and slowly backed away to come back later. But the point in telling that story is to say that that's what an encounter is like. It's this unexpected interaction that requires a reaction, a new decision, a change of course to go a different route. Now, the event that we're going to look at today is the moment when Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' earliest followers, we're going to look at the moment when she encounters Jesus risen from the dead. And I want to tell you up front what we're going to pay attention to in this message and really in the rest of this series. We're going to pay attention to Mary's reaction and Jesus' response. Mary's reaction and Jesus' response. So let's start off by reading the Apostle John's account of this unbelievable encounter. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. Now, why is Mary going to the tomb? Well, it's because Jesus was killed on a Friday afternoon, and the strict Sabbath starts Friday night and runs through Saturday night. And that means that the people who were taking care of Jesus' body had to rush to bury it on Friday evening in order to not break any rules. Now, Mary is probably not far off in assuming that the guys who buried Jesus' body probably didn't do a good job and that they didn't wrap it up with the proper spices for a traditional burial. So we know from the other gospel accounts that Mary shows up with a few others to rewrap and respice Jesus' body so that it's proper for his burial. And that's really important. It means she didn't think the tomb would be empty. She wasn't expecting him to be risen from the dead. She wasn't waiting outside the tomb like it was Groundhog Day, waiting to see if there was going to be 6 more weeks of Jesus' death or not. She wasn't standing there with her friends counting backwards from 10, 9, 8. He's going to pop out any moment. 3, 2. No. She didn't expect. She didn't believe. She didn't imagine that Jesus would be risen from the dead. Just look at her reaction to the empty tomb. And so she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." You see, her reaction was not one of faith. Her assumption was that someone stole the body, because that's what you would assume, right? So Peter and the other disciple, they started for the tomb, and both of them were running. But the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and he looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he didn't go in. And then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. And he saw the strips of linen lying there as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, he also went inside. He saw and believed. Now, if you're familiar with this story, before you jump ahead and think to yourself, the other disciple saw and believed that Jesus rose from the dead. He saw and believed because he's the superior, more faithful follower. I want you to notice what it says. It's unclear what he believed. In fact, what makes the most sense, according to the text, is that he saw and believed Mary. That he believed that Mary was right, that someone stole the body. Because that's what would make the most sense, right? John then adds his own commentary, pointing out they still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. And then the disciples went back to where they were staying. But Mary hung around. John goes on in verse 11. He says, "Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, 'Woman, why are you crying?'" Again, notice Mary's reaction to this unexpected interaction. "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." She still thinks that the body has been moved or stolen. She doesn't think that that Jesus is risen from the dead. I mean, the idea that Jesus would somehow be back from the dead, it's not even a thought in her mind. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. She didn't even realize it was him. She didn't realize it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking that he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, just tell me where you put him so that I can go get him." I mean, she's staring Jesus in the face, and she still doesn't think it's him. She assumes it's the well-meaning gardener or something. All right, okay. So why am I harping on this so much? Why is Mary's reaction so important? Because it's real. It makes sense. It tracks with reality because it's exactly how I might respond if I went to the tomb of a loved one who had just passed away and I found it empty. I mean, isn't it how you would respond? And here's why this is so important to me and why I think it should be important to you. If you find yourself having a difficult time accepting Christianity as true, if you have a difficult time believing that a man who was crucified and died and buried, who went through torturous hell until his final breath, experiencing the excruciating pain of a Roman crucifixion, arguably the worst possible way that humans have designed to kill one another. I mean, if you have a difficult time believing that somehow, less than 72 hours after an event like that, the same crucified person be up, walking around, talking to people, if that's hard for you to believe, I want you to know you're not alone. If you or someone you love has a difficult time believing in Easter Sunday, the risen Jesus, if you're thinking to yourself, "I just don't buy it," I want you to know, and John, who wrote this down, wants you to know that they didn't buy it either. Mary assumed someone stole him. Mary assumed someone moved him. Not that somebody raised him from the dead. Nobody expected no body. That's Mary's reaction. But then comes the encounter that would change her life forever. Not just her life, but the other disciples' lives. I mean, Peter and John, who were the first ones to come when she called, and then the rest of the disciples, and then the next 270 years of followers that would come after her, long before Christianity was connected to political power or the beliefs benefited anybody. But when it was being persecuted, it was this encounter that sparked the movement. And it all started with Jesus' response to Mary. Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." She told them that he had said these things to her. You see, her initial reaction wasn't one of blind faith when she encountered the tomb, the special messengers, or even Jesus himself. But Jesus' response was to call her by name and then give her a purpose and a mission. Now, let's talk about that for a minute, the calling her by name part first. Because you might think to yourself, well, what's the big deal? I mean, he's talking to her. Of course he would use her name. What's the significance of Jesus talking to Mary first? Well, there's actually a lot of Marys in the Gospels who roll with Jesus. There's Mary, his mother, then there's Mary, Martha's sister, and then there's someone called the other Mary, kind of poor girl. But then there's the famous Mary Magdalene. Well, we call her Mary Magdalene, but it'd actually be more proper for us to call her Mary the Magdalene. Magdalene wasn't her last name. No, she was from the town of Magdala. Now, why would somebody be regularly associated with the town they're from? Well, that's a good question. Magdala was actually a Jewish fishing town off the coast of the Sea of Galilee, and it was known at that time by Jewish folks as the town of loose morals, a town from the wrong side of the tracks, a town in particular that had prostitution running rampant. Now, it's conjecture, but based on her lack of marital status and united with the town that she's from, many people assume that Mary was either a current or former prostitute. The historian Luke, to add to this, he wrote both the Gospel of Luke and Acts. He wrote that Mary was demon-possessed and that Jesus had healed her. Now, demon possession is kind of a catch-all term that refers to emotional or mental distress or some sort of uncontrollable physical malady. But at any rate, she was struggling. In other words, Jesus chose to reveal himself first, pay attention to this, not the powerful, not the rich, not the strong or the perfectly faithful or the blind believer. He chose not to reveal himself even to the future pillars of the church, even though they came so close to seeing him first. No, instead, he chose to reveal himself to a deeply troubled woman from a disgraced town and a sketchy history and past. A person who was so far past skepticism that she looked him in the face and still didn't believe that he had risen from the dead. He chose to say her name first. Mary. Not only did he choose to reveal himself to her, but then he gives her this mission. He says, go tell the others. I mean, if the heart of the Christian faith, the gospel message, is the death and the resurrection of Jesus, then that kind of makes Mary Magdala the first preacher. Now, why does this matter to me so much? Because, again, so often I think the Christian faith sort of gets painted as this place that we think is only for perfect people. There's this house of no horrors. We scrutinize everybody who walks through the door. The top descriptors of Christians on Google is that we're judgmental and we're hypocritical. But if we are, it's not because we're Christians. That can't be the reason. I mean, that's not our story. That's certainly not my story. Come on, perfection's not your story either. We all have Magdalas in our rearview mirror, and we are all still fighting demons, aren't we? But this is why Christianity has survived those first 300 years before it was co-opted by people in power. It survived because it was this incredible encounter of grace from God to broken and skeptical and sketchy people like Mary of Magdala and people like me and people like you. It survived not because of what Mary believed on blind faith. It survived because of what she saw. It survived because of who she encountered. Mary encountered the risen Jesus, and his response changed everything. He spoke her name, and it gave her a whole new direction in life. She went back and told those disciples about what she had seen and heard. She went back and told them what she encountered. And soon after, they had some of their own encounters with the risen Jesus, and we'll talk about those in the coming weeks. But John, one of Jesus' closest followers, who initially walked away from the empty tomb believing that Mary was right, that someone had stolen the body, he decided to write this all down. Why? So that in some way, as we read through these encounters that people like Mary had with the risen Jesus, that in some way we might hear him graciously say our names too and invite us to a meaningful mission in life. And that's my hope for you. I mean, that's the good news of the gospel, that even though we've all got our own sketchy or skeptical past, Jesus still speaks our names. Whatever your reaction to this encounter, Jesus' response is still one of grace and mercy. He doesn't chastise Mary for her unbelief or rail on her for her reaction. And he's not going to do that to you either. He's still offering grace and mercy. So, my friends, my hope for you as we walk through this series of conversations for the next couple of weeks together, my hope for you is that as we read about these encounters, that in some way you would encounter Jesus too, that you would experience him saying your name and inviting you to a meaningful mission in your own, and that unexpected interaction would give you an opportunity for a response and reaction. like I said off the top, my name's Corey, and I'm one of the new faces joining this physically scattered but digitally gathered church community. And I'm joining all the way from Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm excited to serve you and to serve with you, although we're in different places. I think we're still one community with one purpose, and that's to grow as followers of Jesus. And so if you'd like to learn more about me and who I am, I made a separate 75-second introduction video that you can watch, and you can find that in the link in the description below. But if it's okay, I want to tell you what I think growing as disciples could look like for us at Redeemer Online. I see it as being kind of this three-step process. My hope is for us that we would move from step one, which is kind of where we are now, consuming content, watching videos, move from that towards step two, which would be connecting and communicating with each other, either through email or social media or even text message. And then finally move to step three, which is all about going from communicating to contributing, to becoming people who don't just like to watch Redeemer Online, but people who live it. Now, what exactly does that look like, living it? Well, it could be a lot of things, but I think in general, it's about contributing to the spiritual goodness of our households, our neighborhoods, and our wider communities. It means entering into a discipleship process that we've outlined in order to grow our understanding of Jesus and our habits and practices so that we can live and love like him. That's how we're going to grow as disciples together. From content to connecting to contributing and co-creating, living Redeemer Online. And that means that if you're here right now and you're watching this, you're on step one of our discipleship journey together. But I'd love to meet you and connect with you and begin to communicate so that we can move from step one to step two. And so that means simply right now, I want you to pull out your phone. Open up either your email app or your text message app or social media. I want you to punch in my number or my email address or look me up. And all you have to do so that we can connect is say, "Hi, Corey, and insert your name and tell me I'm here." That's all. Go ahead. You do it right now. Right now, I'm serious. I want you to do it. I'll wait. It's no big deal. Just take the leap. Move from step one to step two. Pull up my information and shoot me a message saying, "Hi, Corey, I'm so-and-so, and I'm here." Now, I look forward to connecting with you, and we're going to continue this conversation that we've started today about these initial encounters that Jesus had both with his original disciples after his resurrection and by proxy with us. But for now, I want to leave you with this blessing. I want to send you off with the love of your Heavenly Father, the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit that binds us all together, even though we are separated all over the place. And we'll see you next week.